What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my Inquisitor build for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. I've been going through each of the classes, making a fun build for them, kind of just how I like to play that class, or a fun way to play that class. This isn't intended to be like a min-max type thing. The difficulty that we're shooting for with most of these builds is around core, though I will give a recommendation for each build as we go. And for this particular build, core should be the way to go. You can definitely do anything lower than that. You could probably go hard. Unfair is hard to really recommend much of anything for because it is just very difficult. But core, you should be okay. Now, in today's video, we are going to be focusing on a tactical leader Inquisitor. I will say the very last level of tactical leader, that is to say level 20, is basically useless. So if you wanted to take one level into another class, you could do that. But this build is just focusing on tactical leader, but just know that if you wanted to put literally one level into something else, you would probably be fine. This build and tactical leader primarily revolves around granting teamwork feats to your team through the ability called Swift Tactician. And while this build will do a lot of good solid damage, our primary role is going to be party support, that is granting them buffs through our feats through Swift Tactician, as well as the buffs we get from the Inquisitor spell list. We are going to be a melee Inquisitor wielding a two-handed scythe, charging into battle, granting our teammates buffs and things through our Swift Tactician ability, and through use of the animal domain, we're going to keep an animal companion with us as well. First of all, before we jump into it, let's talk about what Tactical Leader actually gives you. For starters, we lose solo tactics, which gives an Inquisitor their teamwork feat bonuses even if their party doesn't actually have them, and we lose a couple of our teamwork feat choices, and this gets replaced primarily with Swift Tactician, which means at 3rd, 9th, and 18th level, we're going to gain a teamwork feat as a bonus feat. We do have to meet the prerequisites, and then as a standard action, through use of the Swift Tactician ability, we can grant these feats to all allies within 30 feet that can see and hear you. It's going to start out with a minimum of 4 rounds, and then that's going to increase as you level up in terms of duration, and then you can use this ability more and more as you level up to a maximum of 4 times a day. Moreover, at 12th level, we can actually use this as a swift ability, meaning it won't take up a standard action or an attack, basically. Now, the other thing we get specific to a tactical leader is battle acumen, which means at 14th level, you can grant your judgment benefits to a single other ally within 30 feet who can see and hear you, again as a standard action, which basically lets other classes use the Inquisitor's judgment abilities for 1 minute. Those are the things that are specific to the tactical leader. But I do want to mention a couple of other things, and those are the things that are specific to an Inquisitor that make them really great, because Inquisitors are an amazing all-around class. And if you're new to the game, Inquisitors are really probably the best class to start with just because of the wide range of what they're able to do. But that said, the things specific to an Inquisitor that you want to know is that for starters, they get regular base attack bonus, which means it's not full. They get a max spell level of 6 of the Inquisitor spell list, which is primarily Divine Casting, which uses the Wisdom ability score and is mostly focused on healing, removing debuffs, as well as party buffs. Moreover, they cast spontaneously. Also, there are 2 abilities an Inquisitor gets that you should really know about, and those are Judgments and Bane. Judgments are really cool. It's a series of abilities that basically grant you a small bonus into something. So this can be your armor class. It's usually a sacred bonus, by the way, which is important because it won't stack with other sacred bonuses. This will be like a +1 to your saving throws, a +1 to your damage reduction versus magic, your attack rolls. And as you level up, you'll actually be able to use more than one of these at once. But basically, they're just bonuses that a Inquisitor can use on themselves. And then as you level up, they get progressively stronger. And then the second is Bane. Bane is incredibly strong. Bane is basically just free damage against enemies when you turn it on. You can only use it a number of rounds per day. However, while the text tells you have to declare an enemy that is your Bane, the game actually does that part for you. So turning Bane on is basically just free damage. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the rest of character creation, which is where I'd like to start with this. For the Tactician here, really what we want to pick up is human, in my opinion, simply because of some specific things we're going to be doing. So that said, if you want to mix this up, feel free. It's meant to be fun. Humans get a +2 to 1 ability score of their choice. Moreover, they also get an extra feat at level 1, which is important because we're actually going to need that extra feat. For a background, I recommend you pick up Acolyte, specifically because we're going to be using Persuasion, and the Acolyte background changes the Persuasion checks to your Wisdom modifier instead of your Charisma. And we're not using Charisma, we're using Wisdom. Now, for our ability scores themselves, I recommend taking Strength to 18, Wisdom to 13, and Constitution to 16. We don't need a ton of Wisdom, but we do need it to cast our spells, so we do need some Wisdom. Now, we don't need a ton of it, though, because we can get it through items and things and buff that up later. 13 is kind of a good spot for me. You do need a little Constitution and Strength because we are going to be a melee frontliner, so we're going to be up in the fray a lot. We're going to be using Strength for all of our attacks, and we need the Constitution to not die. So for skills, Inquisitors get a ton of skills. Every single skill available is a class skill, which means we could theoretically be very good at it. I recommend Athletics, Lore Nature, Lore Religion, Perception, and Persuasion, just because those are the ones that our ability scores are going to give us bonuses in, and then Persuasion because of the feats we're going to take a little bit later. Now for our starting feats, because of what we're doing here, one of them needs to be Martial Weapon Proficiency. Martial Weapon Proficiency is going to let us use Scythes, which is, for this build, kind of what I had in mind, though that said, thankfully, due to Finian the Talking Weapon, who can be any weapon you want him to be, you can honestly change the weapon part of this to whatever. Personally, I envision this build using Scythes. That said, if you want to use a different weapon, go crazy. I would recommend you keep it to melee weapons, though, because of A, the way we're doing the rest of this build, and B, you'll get more use out of your teamwork feats if you are in melee. At least your character will. And also, because there is a range on the feats themselves when you use Swift Tactician, it's better to be in melee or as close to your allies as possible so they continue to benefit from it. But feel free to change the weapon. For our second feat, personally, I like to pick up Blind Fight, which is going to give us immunity to gaze attacks, which are special attacks that higher level monsters get. And also, it'll cause invisible attackers not to get their extra bonuses attacking you, which can help you out. And then for our deity, this part is actually a little important. Inquisitors do benefit from their deity a little bit by getting to pick a domain. So basically the deity an Inquisitor picks determines what domains they're able to pick from, and then they'll get a few bonuses from that domain. Now what we need to pick is a deity with the animal domain. Personally, I like Gosre, as it is a neutral god, and you can kind of pick, for the most part, whatever alignment you want outside of that, which leaves you kind of open. But basically, any god that gives you an animal domain will do, because the animal domain is going to grant us an animal companion at level 4. The animal companion will be level 1, but we're going to fix that with a feat. Now, for our level 1 spells, I recommend Bless and Divine Favor. Bless is a party buff, and Divine Favor will give you a luck bonus to use specifically. Divine Favor does kind of get replaced by Prayer later on, which is a level 3 spell, but these will give you some buffs early game to help you out. And then the rest is all cosmetic. And next up, we're going to talk about feats. So we're going to talk about feats, then we're going to talk about just a few different spells here and there that can kind of help you out. And then we're going to talk about some early game strategies for the build. So for our feats though, I'm going to give you 2 separate options here. Now the first few levels basically are always the same. However, from about level 7 to all the way up to 19 when you get those feats, there can be a little bit of change if you want. I'm going to give you 2 different sets of options here. So level 1, Blind Fight and Martial Weapon Proficiency. Level 3, I recommend picking up Weapon Focus for whatever you decided to use. For this, we're of course going with a Scythe. And then at level 5, pick Boon Companion. Now, Boon Companion's not going to be at the top of the list. It's easier to search it, but you can pick it at level 5 because at level 4, you'll have gotten your pet. And then at level 5, when we pick Boon Companion, that's going to bring our pet up to our level. Now, starting at level 7, we have 2 options basically. Personally, I like to go into the Intimidate feats, which allow us to use our Persuasion to make Intimidate checks as we attack enemies, basically. Now that starts with Dazzling Display. We're not really going to use Dazzling Display in combat much, but Dazzling Display is a prerequisite to the rest of them that we actually want. Now at 9, we won't actually have the base attack bonus to potentially get some of those feats, so I like to pick up Power Attack then, because that also leads us into some of the Intimidate feats. And then starting at 11, we can pick up Cornagon Smash. 13, you can pick up Cleave, which will let you use a single attack with a full base attack bonus against a foe, and then if we hit it, we deal normal damage and make an additional attack against another foe that's adjacent to the first and also within reach. But we take a -2 penalty with our armor class. Now, there's a couple reasons we'll pick this up. One, there is a Scythe in Act 2 that couples amazingly with. but also just because it's fun. 15 and 17, I recommend you pick up Dreadful Carnage and Shatter Defenses. Dreadful Carnage will let you make an Intimidate check on all enemies within 30 feet whenever you kill something, and then Shatter Defenses will cause any shaken, frightened, or panicked opponent hit by you this round to be flat-footed to your attacks until the end of our next turn, which basically makes them easier to hit. Last, I like to pick up Cleaving Finish. Now, Cleaving Finish will allow you to hit more things when you cleave, when you kill things. Now, as I said, I want to mention a separate set of options here. If you don't like the Intimidate Persuasion checks here, what I would suggest instead is going all in on the Cleave feats, because if you're unaware, there's like a whole line of feats centered around Cleave that, of course, start with Cleave. And those feats basically revolve around you just using your Cleave attacks, either killing something or just making progressively more Cleave attacks to hit as many things around you as possible. Now, because we're a melee fighter, and in theory we might be surrounded by several enemies at once, that can work out pretty well, especially if you choose to use a weapon that has reach and thus can, hit things from even farther away. That could be a fun option for you, and as an alternative, I figured I'd mention it here. But personally, I like the Intimidate feats myself, and that brings us to spells. Now, early game, there's basically 2 spells you want to rely on, and that is Bless and Prayer. Now, Bless is going to give you a +1 morale bonus on attack rolls and saving throws. It also dispels Bane if you happen to get hit with that. Now, a lot of things give morale bonuses, so this can sometimes not stack, but you can get this at level 1, which makes it a very effective party buff for the first act of the game. And then at spell level 3, we can pick up Prayer. Prayer is a 40-foot burst that affects both your allies and your enemies. Your enemies will get a +1 luck bonus to attack rolls, weapon damage rolls, saves, and skill checks, and it gives your enemies a -1 penalty to those things. So those are big party buffs that we can get very easily. Now, the rest of the Inquisitor's spell list is primarily focused around curing things, hold person, protection from alignment, and basically just a lot of party buff type stuff. So for those spells, what you want to focus on is the party buff type stuff. Anything that says communal, for instance, is usually a party buff. Now, depending on what you're doing, that might change, and you can only learn so many spells per level. However, we are a spontaneous caster, so we don't need to worry about memorizing any of them. But the 2 most important, I would say, are Bless and Prayer, as those work in basically every situation. Just keep in mind, with the Inquisitor spells, we're really focused on party buffs and utility. We're not trying to really do any damage here. So you'll get a couple of damage spells, but we're not going to have the ability to really do much with those, because we're going to have low difficulty checks on things like spell resistance, etc. So we're not really trying to deal damage with our spells. Party buffs, utility. Now let's talk about some gameplay. Now I'm going to show you guys some mid-level gameplay, and I'm going to talk about what to do in Act 1 and Act 2. So Act 1, we're not going to have access to a lot of the fun stuff. This is a build that primarily starts to come together towards the end of Act 2 and the start of Act 3. Because in Act 1, we're basically going to have access to Bless, and then at level 3, we'll get Swift Tactician. I recommend you pick the back-to-back feat as a teamwork feat at level 3. Because back-to-back will give you basically a +2 bonus to your AC for your characters that have it when you use your Swift Tactician, which will just make you harder to hit. Now for Act 1, that's about all you get, actually. Beyond that, we're going to be mostly just a regular melee warrior. You might try to use Divine Favor, which is also a level 1 spell, to buff yourself. And then beyond that, we're charging in, we're hitting things. Equipment in Act 1 is a little sparse. You'll find Finian, the talking weapon, who can give you a very good scythe at that level. In the Grey Garrison, which is the last part of Act 1, you can pick up a special scythe called the Dark Glowing Scythe, which is very good for the level you find it at. And then for the rest of our equipment, basically medium armor, which is what you'll start the game with, and then just the best stuff you can find. Now for Act 2, this is where things start to pick up a little bit. At level 5, we'll get our Bane ability, which, as I mentioned, is just free damage. It's 2d6 extra damage. Towards the end of it, we'll get our second teamwork feat, and then at the end of Act 1, start of Act 2, we'll get our pet. He'll come online, and in terms of that pet, what I recommend is a Smilodon, because they do ridiculous damage, and they're very easy to set up to do that damage because they get so many full attacks when they charge. And while I'm not gonna tell you which pet to pick, because honestly, again, trying to make this fun, so pick whatever you want. However, my recommendation would be the Smilodon, and also give it the Intimidate feat line, which makes them very strong because of the amount of attacks they get and how often they're going to be killing things because of all the damage they do. Also, I like the Pet Aggressor archetype for the Smilodon as well. It will give you extra bleed damage as it levels up. kind of leaving the pet wide open on purpose. I want people to enjoy their pet choice. It kind of makes the build feel more personal, in my opinion, to pick that one yourself. But a recommendation, Smilodon, Intimidate Feline. But that's kind of Act 2, and then in Act 2 we can actually start getting some really good equipment. For starters, we can get the Scythe Wide Sweep from the Quartermaster in our tent. Wide Sweep is a scythe that when you hit an enemy with it, will also deal its weapon damage to anything within a 5-foot burst. So they have to be kind of lumped on top of each other for it to work. But if they're close, you'll essentially hit both enemies with a regular attack. It can be quite strong, especially if you pair it with Cleave, because Cleave makes you hit 2 separate enemies. And if you hit them with Wide Sweep, it will stack, which is kind of nonsense. There you are. Now, I'm going to show you some mid-game combat, which is probably running in the background up to this point, to kind of give you some realistic expectations of what to expect here on core difficulty, which is what we're showing you here. Now, at the start of combat, like I mentioned, what you want to do is buff up, ideally before you get to the encounter. Sometimes that's not always possible. For our Inquisitor, that basically means Prayer and Bless, as well as our Swift Tactician. You want to be careful with Swift Tactician because it only lasts a number of rounds. So you want to use it like literally right before the start of combat so you get as much use out of it as possible. And then that's going to give our teamwork feats to our companions. And then at that point, we're basically just using ourself and our companions to charge and attack things. And they'll be all the more effective for it because of all the buffs we've given them. But we ourselves are also going to be capable of doing some real damage. So for instance here, with our Bane activated, as well as our Heavenly Sword from a Mythic Angel Path, by the way, because we're at the start of Act 3 here, when we hit this archer, our Wide Sweep goes off, which is what this particular character is using, which then does a regular attack to the enemy next to him, and we kill the archer by hitting it for about 40, and then we hit the guy standing next to him for about 55, which hit for about 90 at the start of Act 3 at level 9. Which is pretty solid for a random melee character, to be honest. So you can kind of see the breakdown here. We have the 4d4 plus 21 from our actual Wide Sweep attack, 2d6 for the Angel Mythic Weapon ability, and then 1d6, which is actually from the Precise Strike Teamwork feat instead of one of the other ones, because we picked up that one in this particular instance. And then the extra 2d6 force damage is actually from our Bane weapon. So overall, very capable build. It's pretty fun. It's, again, primarily focused on party support. And because a lot of people don't necessarily like doing that with their main character, you might consider putting this build on a mercenary instead. Last thing I want to talk about is mythic paths. I don't try to tell anybody what mythic path to pick, but like most things, I will give a recommendation. And my recommendation is Angel or Azada. Angel is really good because honestly, just the nature of the build. Angels get an ability called Angelic Halo, which can then pass buffs onto your party, which again is basically what we're doing with this entire build. And then Azada, through their mythic powers, can actually also pass even more teamwork feats onto your companions as well, which again, obviously just fits it perfectly. Plus Azada gets Ivu, which is the dragon companion that you can pick up. But truthfully, not really any wrong choices in terms of mythic path. All of them are definitely viable, though my recommendation would personally be Angel or Azada. So there you go, guys. There is my Inquisitor build for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. Kind of geared towards players kind of in that Act 1 to 3, and then while I've shown you how to set things up for a later game, I feel like most people are probably running around that Act 1 to 3 area, so that's kind of what I try to focus on when I show combat and things, because as I've mentioned in videos myself, I don't find showing off the max possible damage in game is really useful. So hopefully, and give me feedback about it down below, what I've shown you here and going over things that are useful in Act 1, 2, and 3 are better for you and more digestible, basically. I just want to make sure that these guides are actually helping the people who need it the most. So with that out of the way, truly, honestly, just thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of that stuff, thank you. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.